everyone. Welcome to today's QuickBooks Enterprise Deep Dive webinar. My name is Kat Roskovics, and I'll be your host for today, and we're going to be talking about grant tracking for nonprofits. So today we're going to cover, grant tracking for nonprofits. So a couple of pieces that we're going to go through is setup, transactions, and reporting. So I'm going to switch over to QuickBooks here. And I've just got an empty company file. I do have some, just generic accounts set up in my chart of accounts. I've got a bank account. I've also got some expense accounts. And I'm actually going to modify my income account, and I'm going to make this a grant income account. So it's previously used for another one. So we're just going to modify that. And then I might delete out some of my cost of goods sold accounts here. Oftentimes I see that nonprofits do not have cost of goods sold accounts. We're not going to use any in this demonstration, but there are definitely reasons why you might. Sometimes I see nonprofits having, bookstores or gift shops or that kind of thing. We would definitely have some cost of goods sold if that was the case. But for this file, we're just going to be talking about grant tracking. So I've got my grant income account set up. I've also got some additional expense account set up as well. And I'm going to add one more here. Okay, so I've also got, in case your nonprofit needs to do fund tracking, so basically tracking my profit and loss by different funds, but also my balance sheet, right? So running the balance sheet by class is how we typically see that set up. So I've enabled class tracking under my preferences here. So accounting, company preferences, I've got class tracking turned on. Now, one of the things that you can also do is set up to have classes assigned to names. So I'm actually going to do that as well. And again, turning this on doesn't mean that it's required, right, that you have a class assigned to a name, but it gives you the option of having a default class. So you don't have to have it, and you can always override it if for some reason you need to, but you'll see how this will kind of help us as we're going through this process. So I've got that taken care of. And then I'm going to add a couple of classes here. So first class I'm going to have is just going to be direct grant funds. And then I'm also going to add one for just general fund. And that's all I'm going to use for this demonstration. You may have additional funds that you need to track by. Those can be set up as classes. If you want to get into more what your processes are in tracking, of course, you can always reach out to us for help. So now that I've got my classes set up, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some items. So oftentimes when we're implementing grant tracking for clients, the biggest piece and the reason why we have to do that, the way that I'm going to demonstrate here, is because oftentimes those grants do not follow the same fiscal year as a nonprofit. So you may have a nonprofit that they run October 1st through September 30th, right? That's their fiscal year, but they may have grants that fall in line with the calendar year or run an off-cycle year, right? March 1st to the end of February, or they may also go over a period of multiple years. We have seen that as well. So that's where it becomes really difficult to track that using the regular budgeting tool in QuickBooks, because that budgeting tool, of course, follows your calendar year. So tracking using that budget tool is usually not helpful. So that's why we've got this process. So typically when we're implementing this for clients, we look at their chart of accounts, and especially for any accounts that they have expenses for grants posting to, we want to set up items for those as well. So I'm going to do a couple of examples here. I'm going to just save my fingers some typing. I'm going to take office supplies, and I'm just going to go over to my item list. And I'm going to add a new item. And I'm going to call that item office supplies. And I'm also going to make this a double-sided item. So for my expense account and for my income account, I'm actually going to put grant income. So for all of these, expense account is going to be going to office supplies, income account is going to be going to grant income. And then I'm going to pick another one here. So let me go back to my chart of accounts, and I'm also going to grab that subcontracted services. And you'll see that I'm setting these up as service items. The reason that I'm doing that is actually because that allows me to, if I ever wanted to use one of these items on, say, payroll, like I wanted to track hours to a particular grant and actually have it go against a specific line item that I had set aside for labor on that grant, got to have that set up as a service item. So typically we see all of those set up as service items just in case that ever becomes a need. So then from here, we're going to go ahead and set up the customer. And we're going to start with whoever the grantor is, right? So you may have grants that are coming from the government, from other nonprofits, right? Lots of different sources for that funding. So typically whoever is the grantor, right, with you being the grantee, we're going to set them up as the customer. Then we're also going to add, and you can see right there, it's trying to prompt me to add a class, but I'm going to actually add my class onto my job. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to add a job, and let's just say this was the actual grant. So whatever that grant is called, and let's say that this grant is for, we're just going to call it 2023. Now on my additional info tab, I'm going to go ahead and assign the class direct grant funds. And then you also have the option of adding, maybe you have a particular grant or list of grant managers. Those may be used as a sales rep if I wanted to be able to kind of filter some of my data. So I'm just going to go ahead and add Jane Smith to this grant, or just pretend that she is the grant manager here. You can also have customer types. You can see this sample file still has my default QuickBooks types, but I've also seen customer type being set up as grant. That again just allows me a little bit more ways to filter some data and reports in case I'm using this job cost feature for things other than grants, right? Maybe I'm tracking expenses for assets or tracking expenses for other non-grant funded programs that we have. So this is just another way to kind of filter that out on some reports, right? So more information and knowledge of how to use some of these fields is important during setup. All right, so now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add an estimate for my grant. So this is 2023, right? Grant 2023. I'm going to just pretend that this grant actually did exactly follow my calendar year. So I'm going to have my estimate date is the start date of that grant. Sometimes I've seen custom fields added on to here for things like award number, etc. You can certainly do that. I'm just going to keep it simple. So these line items here, right, which we would have set up in our items list and will correlate to accounts in our chart of accounts. These are going to be my line items that are approved, right, for my grant budget. So let's say I had office supplies in here, and I'm just going to say that I had 10,000 office supplies. And then let's also say that I had some contracted services. Okay. So we've got a grant for 30,000 here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say save. And then we're going to come in and we're going to enter in some expenses for that grant. So let's go back to my vendors. Okay, so I don't have any vendors. So let's just make up a vendor here. We're going to have supplier. And we're also going to have one contractor. Let's just say. All right. And then what I'm going to do, and you could utilize this right on any type of transaction. If we were using a credit card transaction, we'll have the items tab. If we're using a check transaction, we'll have the items tab. So I'm going to go ahead and enter a bill to my contractor vendor. And let's just say that this bill is for $500. And I'm going to put this not on my expenses tab, but I'm going to put it on my items tab. So I'm going to say subcontracted services. Let's just say that was 500. And then I'm going to put it to that job. And you can see there that it's picking up that direct grant funds class right away. So it's defaulting there because that is the class that I have assigned to this job. Now the same would hold true if we were using, those service items on payroll, right? If we any transaction where we pick that customer job, it's going to automatically pick up that direct grant funds. So then let's go ahead and add another expense here. Supplier. And let's say this expense came in March, and we're going to add, I don't know, let's see. And same thing, I'm going to not have that on my expenses tab. I'm going to have it on my items tab, and I want that to go to that line item on my grant. And check that box so it doesn't keep popping up as well. I'm going to pick my grant, and it's again going to default to direct grant funds. Now I'm not going to mark these expenses billable because we're going to bill them a little bit differently. So I'm just unchecking those boxes as I go through. Now it's important to note that if you got a bill and part of it was for a grant and part of it was maybe for some other office supplies that are more general, don't go to this grant specifically, right? You can still use the expenses tab for that. I could put it to office supplies and I could put it to the general fund as an example, right? So you can use both tabs at once. There's no harm in doing that. You just have to make sure, if you think about it in your head, anything grant related, we definitely want to use that items tab for, and you'll see why here in a second. So let me go back to my estimate because I just realized, oh good, I have my class turned on. I just wanted to make sure of that. So right now we can run a couple of reports. So first off, we can run our profit and loss by class. Now we have not invoiced against that grant to draw down any funds, but you can see that we've spent, right, 2,500. And then of course we had 3,000 going to office supplies. Now at this point, I can also run my my balance sheet by class. And I would be able to see, again, I don't have any bank transactions related to this yet, but you can see how that one bill that we posted for the $2,000 in office supplies for the grant, and then also another 3,000 for just general fund. It does, apply those two based on how that bill is tracked. So based on how you classify those line items on the bill, you will see that impacting the balance sheet by class report. Now we can also see if we go and run a job report, and we're going to go to estimates versus actuals detail. And I'm going to pick grant 2023 one. Now here I can see what my estimated cost is, what my actual cost is, my difference, and my estimated revenue. Now for grants, this grant in particular, there's no indirect funds on it, so we are basically allowed to spend or draw down exactly what we spend. Some grants will have an indirect portion as well. If that's similar to what your situation is, reach out. We can help you get that set up as well. But for right now, we've got 2,000 going in as actual cost against office supplies, 500 against subcontracted services. So what I'm going to do, and if I was running this through, let's just say the end of January, so I needed to see what I needed to draw down. I can see I've got 500 here, and then I don't have any actual revenue for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to say customers, create invoices. I'm going to type in that grant. I'm going to say okay, and I am going to look back at 500 on subcontracted services. And let's say we were doing this for January. We're going to keep that date the same. Now, for a lot of my clients that are doing this tracking, these invoices and the estimates are internal documents only. So they're a way that we use transactions in QuickBooks to record things how we want them to show up on reporting, not necessarily to, share those documents with our client because they're paying from those. Oftentimes you are just reporting up to the grantor, not on an invoice, what you've spent, and they're typically wiring those funds. So this is just a way to be able to track that a little bit easier in QuickBooks. So if I go back to my report, now I can see that I've got my actual cost, my actual revenue for those two are the same. So 1950, 1950. Now, if I wanted to run this report through 3/31/23, I can see that I've got another $2,000 that came in through the end of March. So then I would do the same thing again. Go and create an invoice for those funds that came in that we spent the $2,000, and then we've got that. And then of course, when you receive payment for those funds, we can do receive payments. I'm going to pick that grantor. We're going to say they paid us the 500. Let's say they paid it to us on February 1st. All right, so no change there, right? Because I've already invoiced that amount out. But if I go back to my balance sheet by class, you'll see that we now have $500 in direct grant funds sitting in our undeposited funds account, which we could then move those over to our bank account. Could also set up in your file if you need to, right? If you are getting wired funds, as an example, there is an option to have undeposited funds go straight to my bank account if I want to. So let me just turn that on so you could see the difference there and what that transaction will look like. Nope, I'm gonna record that. No. All right, so let's go back to that balance sheet by class report. So if you want the option on your payments, again, I just turned off undeposited funds. That undeposited funds account will still exist, but now I get this drop down box. So if I'm getting wired funds from a particular grantor, I'm able to say, hey, I don't want to carry those through undeposited funds. They're going to match line to line. With something on my bank statement, I can actually have those go straight to checking. And then if I have other, donor funds that I'm getting in, etc., I could record those using, a sales transaction if I wanted to. That might be a future topic we can go through, or have those just go straight through onto a deposit. I'm just going to say yes here. Yep. And then let's look at that balance sheet by class report again. And now we can see that we've got 500 in direct funds sitting in our checking account. We're still negative 2,000 here. Now you can still utilize the profit and loss by job report as well. That's another report that some of my clients will use. I'm just going to show that real quick here. And this is also where you could filter this report. I just wanted to see Jane Smith as an example. So going to show me the total for grantor, but if there was other grants in here that Jane did not, keep track of, we would be able to see just hers on here. So that's something else I wanted to note as well. Okay, so hopefully you've learned a little bit more about how you can utilize the job cost feature of QuickBooks to track grants for nonprofits. So a couple of future courses we have. Of course, the What's New in 2024 is coming up, as I just mentioned. We also will be talking about recurring services, FSM, so field service management integration with QuickBooks Enterprise is also coming up. And then if you have any suggestions for other things that you'd like to learn, feel free to shoot those over and we can get those added. Thank you so much. I hope y'all have a wonderful rest of the day.